The doctor looked at me through the glass doors of the emergency room and said, "Your wife survived the crash." For 3 seconds, I forgot how to breathe. Then he added, "But there's something you need to know." My relief vanished. What happened to her? The doctor hesitated. She woke up asking about a sound nobody else could hear. I stared at him. What sound? He lowered his voice. She said she could hear people thinking. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because I was terrified. 6 hours earlier, I had been standing beside my wife, Elena, arguing with her about a dinner reservation. Now she was unconscious after a highway crash, and a doctor was telling me she had said something impossible. I pushed through the doors. Elena lay beneath a white blanket, bruises darkening one side of her face. Her left arm was immobilized. Machines beeped steadily beside her bed. I took her hand. Elena. Her fingers moved. Then her eyes opened. For a moment, she looked confused. Then she looked directly at me. "You didn't call your brother," she whispered. I froze. "What?" "You thought about calling Daniel." I stared at her. Daniel was my younger brother. I had not told anyone I had considered calling him. Elena swallowed. "You thought Daniel will know what to do." The room seemed to shrink around me. "How did you know that?" She closed her eyes. "I don't know. I wanted to dismiss it as medication, trauma, confusion. But then she whispered something else. "You're afraid?" "I am." "No." Her eyes opened again. "You're not afraid for me." I felt cold. "What are you talking about?" She looked toward the door. "You're afraid I'll remember." "Remember what?" She didn't answer. That night, I sat beside her bed until sunrise. And for the first time in 7 years of marriage, I wondered whether I had ever truly known my wife. Elena and I had met in college. She was quiet, practical, and almost painfully patient. I was the opposite. I talked too much, dreamed too loudly, and made promises before thinking about whether I could keep them. She used to smile whenever I said, "One day, I'll build something that matters." I had been an engineering student with a half-finished idea for a device that could detect dangerous structural vibrations before buildings failed. Everyone told me it was unrealistic. Elena never did. She worked part-time to help pay my tuition. When I wanted to quit, she said, "Then quit because you found something better. Don't quit because you're scared." I married her because she believed in me before I had given anyone a reason to. But somewhere along the way, our roles changed. My career grew. Her sacrifices became invisible, and I became accustomed to her patience. That was the first betrayal. Not an affair, not a secret lover, something quieter. I stopped noticing the woman who had once stood beside me when nobody else believed in me. The second betrayal came 2 years before the crash. My company offered me a position overseas. It was the opportunity of my career. Elena had just been accepted into a graduate program she had dreamed about since college. I told her I couldn't leave. She looked at me for a long time. "You should go," she said. "What about you?" "I'll come later." But she never did. My company wanted me immediately. I went. She stayed behind. And instead of appreciating what she had sacrificed, I began telling myself that she was holding me back. Our conversations became shorter. Her dreams became inconvenient. Her questions became accusations. Then, 3 months before the crash, she found a folder on my laptop. Inside were documents transferring the rights to my original invention to my company. She stared at me. "You're selling the project?" "I need the money. You promised we'd finish it together." "That was years ago, Elena." She nodded. She didn't yell. That should have warned me. Instead, I walked away. 3 weeks later, she asked for separation. I refused. Not because I was ready to change, because I couldn't accept the idea that she might leave me. And then the crash happened. Now, lying in that hospital room, Elena looked at me as if she had discovered something I had spent years hiding. Not from her, from myself. At 7 in the morning, she suddenly grabbed my wrist. "Don't sign anything." I frowned. "Sign what?" She looked frightened. "The company papers." My heart stopped. "What company papers?" She stared at me. "I saw them in your mind." I pulled my hand away. "Elena, that's impossible." "I know." Her voice broke. "But I can't hear them." "Who? People." "Whose people?" She closed her eyes. Then she whispered 3 words that changed everything. "Your brother's voice." Daniel arrived at the hospital 40 minutes later. He walked in carrying coffee and wearing the same concerned expression he had used at my father's funeral. "How is she? Awake?" He smiled with relief. Then Elena looked at him. Her face went pale. "You?" Daniel stopped. "What? You were there." He frowned. "Where?" "The office." I looked between them. "What office?" Daniel glanced at me, then back at Elena. She suddenly pressed both hands against her temples. "Stop." "What?" I asked. "Tell him to stop thinking." Daniel's face changed. Only for a second, but I saw it. Elena saw it too. "You're thinking about the blue folder," she whispered. Daniel stepped backward. "What blue folder?" Elena looked at me. "He knows." Daniel's voice sharpened. "She's confused. The accident damaged her brain." The moment he said it, Elena flinched. "You thought that too?" Daniel stared at her. I couldn't move. For years, I had trusted my brother more than anyone. When Elena and I fought, Daniel told me she was too sensitive. When she complained that I worked too much, he told me successful marriages required sacrifice. When she said my company was taking advantage of my invention, Daniel said she was becoming jealous. And when Elena asked me to slow down, Daniel always had the same answer. "Don't let guilt ruin your future." Now he stood beside her hospital bed, and my wife was looking at him like she had seen behind a locked door. The doctor entered and asked us to leave. Daniel followed me into the hallway. "What is wrong with her?" "I don't know. You can't seriously believe this mind-reading nonsense." "I don't." He exhaled. "Good." Then he smiled. "You're exhausted. You need sleep." I looked at him. "Did you ever see the blue folder?" His smile disappeared. "No." The answer came too quickly. I said nothing. That evening, while Elena slept, I went home. Our apartment felt different. Every object seemed to belong to a life that had already ended. On the bookshelf was the small wooden model of a bridge I had built during college. Elena had painted the tiny supports by hand. I picked it up. A memory returned. We were 22, sitting on the floor of a cheap apartment. I had just told her my professor called my invention useless. She had laughed. "Then prove him wrong." "Ow!" "Build it again." "I don't have money." She had placed her savings envelope in my hand. "I do." I had promised her that one day she would never have to sacrifice for me again. I closed my eyes. I had broken that promise so completely that I couldn't even remember when it happened. Then my phone rang. It was Elena. I answered immediately. "Are you okay?" Her voice was weak. "Come back to the hospital." "Why?" I remembered something. I grabbed my keys. "What?" A long silence. Then she said, "The crash wasn't an accident." I stopped breathing. "What do you mean?" I heard someone thinking about the brakes. My grip tightened around the phone. "Who?" "I don't know his name." "Was it Daniel?" "No." My relief lasted less than a second. "Then who?" Elena whispered, "Someone who works for you." I drove back to the hospital without remembering half the journey. When I entered her room, she was awake. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I don't know why this is happening." "I sat beside her." "Then we'll figure it out." She shook her head. "You shouldn't stay." "Why?" "Because I can't hear what you think too." I looked at her. "What do you hear?" She reached for my hand. And for the first time since the crash, she smiled sadly. "I hear that you still love me." My eyes burned. "I do, but you're also thinking about leaving me." I couldn't answer. Because she was right. Not because I wanted to abandon her. Because some part of me had already understood something painful. The woman lying in that hospital bed had spent years asking me to see her. I had ignored her. Now, after surviving a crash that nearly killed her, she had developed a strange ability that forced her to hear what everyone refused to say aloud. And the first truth she heard from me was the one I had never dared to admit. I had loved her, but love had not made me a good husband. Elena squeezed my hand. "Don't stay because you feel guilty." "I don't know what to do." "You do." She looked toward the window. "Go home." "Why?" "Because tomorrow, your company is going to ask you to sign something." My stomach tightened. "What?" She looked back at me. "And this time, don't sign it." That night, I understood that the crash had not simply changed Elena. It had exposed something buried beneath our marriage. And before the week was over, I would discover that the person who had betrayed me most deeply was not the person I had suspected. It was the person I had trusted enough to never question. The next morning, my company called before I had even finished my coffee. Mr. Rowan, the board needs your signature today. I looked at the documents waiting in my inbox. My brother Daniel had already sent them. The subject line read, Emergency Transfer Authorization. I opened the first page. It was exactly what Elena had warned me about. The company wanted temporary control of my research division and the intellectual property connected to my vibration detection technology. I called Daniel. You said yesterday there were no papers. There weren't. I have them in front of me. Silence. Then he said, they're standard. Why do they need my signature? Because of the crash. My fingers tightened around the phone. What does my accident have to do with company ownership? You're not thinking clearly. There was again the same sentence, the same concern, the same way he had spoken whenever Elena challenged something. I ended the call. Then I stared at the documents again. Something was wrong. I just didn't know how deep it went. At the hospital, Elena was awake when I arrived. She looked at me and immediately said, You didn't sign? No. She smiled faintly. What are they thinking? I don't want to know. You need to. Why? Because that's how you survive. He sat beside her. Tell me what you heard. She hesitated. Your brother wasn't thinking about the transfer. Then what? He was thinking about a test. I frowned. What test? I don't know. She closed her eyes. There's a man named Victor. My heart skipped. Victor Hale was the head of our research division. He had worked with me for 6 years. He was thinking about a warehouse, Elena continued. A number. 17. I stared at her. Warehouse 17. She nodded. I immediately called Victor. No answer. I called again. Nothing. Then my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number appeared. Stop asking questions. I showed Elena. Her face changed. I heard that. What? Not the message. She looked at me. I heard someone thinking those words. A chill went through me. The doctor had told me Elena's brain might be processing trauma in unusual ways. But this was too specific. I drove to the company. For years, that building had been my second home. I had designed the first prototype in the basement laboratory. I remembered sleeping on the office couch. I remembered Elena bringing me food at midnight. I remembered promising her that when the system was finished, we would use it to prevent disasters instead of merely repairing them afterward. That promise had been swallowed by ambition. I entered the research floor. Victor wasn't there. His office was locked. I called Daniel. No answer. Then I noticed something. The security camera above the corridor had been turned away from the hallway. I asked the security guard why. He shrugged. Maintenance. When? Last night. My stomach tightened. I asked for access logs. He hesitated. Only executives can request those. I am an executive. He looked uncomfortable. Your access was temporarily suspended. I stared at him. Who suspended it? He didn't answer. I already knew. Daniel. I walked back to my car. For the first time, I felt something stronger than anger. Fear. Not fear for my career. Fear for Elena. Someone had caused a crash. Someone wanted control of my research. And someone was trying to make me believe I was too emotional to notice. I drove straight to the hospital. Elena was asleep. I sat beside her and watched the monitors. Then she suddenly opened her eyes. Warehouse 17. I leaned closer. What about it? You're going there. No. Her eyes widened. Don't. I won't. You're thinking about going. I sighed. I need answers. She grabbed my sleeve. Not alone. I looked at her. Why? Because whoever is behind this knows you are looking. That night, I called an old colleague named Mara Chen. She had left the company 2 years earlier after an argument with Daniel. I had never asked why. That was another mistake. She agreed to meet me. We sat in a quiet cafe across town. Mara listened without interrupting. When I mentioned the warehouse, she put down her cup. Who told you about that? My wife. Mara stared at me. Your wife. She survived the crash. I know. How? She hesitated. Because Victor called me the night it happened. My blood ran cold. What did he say? He said your prototype had been activated. I stared at her. That was impossible. I told him the same thing. Mara leaned closer. He said, Rowan doesn't know what his own machine can really do. I couldn't speak. My invention had always been designed to detect vibrations. That was all. Or so I thought. Mara reached in her bag and placed a small drive on the table. I kept copies of my old research. Why? Because I didn't trust Daniel. I looked at the drive. What is on it? Your original project notes. I picked it up. Mara's voice dropped. And one thing you never knew. What? The system wasn't just detecting structural vibrations. She looked me directly in the eyes. It was learning from them. I barely slept that night. Mara's words kept repeating in my head. Learning from them. I had spent years thinking my invention was a warning system. But if it had learned from vibrations, then perhaps Elena's strange ability wasn't completely unrelated. The next morning, I brought the drive to the hospital. Elena was sitting by the window. You're scared, she said. I am. What did you find? I told her about Mara. She listened quietly. Then she touched the side of her head. When the crash happened, everything became loud. What do you mean? Not sound. She struggled to explain. Intentions. I frowned. Intentions? Before someone speaks, there is something inside them. A direction. A choice. I can feel it. She looked ashamed. I thought I was losing my mind. I took her hand. You're not. She looked at me. You believe me? I don't understand you. She smiled weakly. But I believe you. For the first time in years, I saw relief in her eyes. Then she said, I don't want this power. Why? Because I can hear what people really think. She looked down. Sometimes the truth is crueler than a lie. I knew exactly what she meant. She had spent years hearing my words. Now she could hear the thoughts behind them. And I was beginning to understand how much pain I had caused her without ever saying the words aloud. I opened Mara's files on my laptop. There were hundreds of pages. Most were technical notes. But buried near the end was a document labeled Project Resonance. I opened it. My own name appeared at the top. I had never seen it before. The project described an experimental system capable of analyzing patterns in human environments through microvibrations. Footsteps, heartbeats, breathing, mechanical movement, even tiny changes in vocal frequency. The system wasn't reading minds, but could recognize patterns. And if those patterns were combined with enough behavioral data, it could predict emotional states with frightening accuracy. My invention had been designed to prevent building failures. Someone had adapted it for something else. Surveillance. I looked at Elena. The crash. She nodded slowly. Someone wanted to test whether the system could affect a person's perception. I felt sick. Why would they test it on you? I don't know. Then her eyes widened. I do. She looked at me. They thought you would be easier to control if I disappeared. The room went silent. I remembered every argument Daniel had encouraged. Every time he told me Elena was becoming an obstacle. Every time he suggested I should focus on the company. Every time I had believed him. My anger turned inward. How long? Elena shook her head. Don't blame yourself. I should have seen it. You trusted your brother. He used that. Yes. Her voice softened. That doesn't make you stupid. I looked at her. It makes you human. Those words broke something inside me. I took her hand. I am sorry. She didn't answer immediately. Then she said, I know. I should have listened. I know. I should have protected you. Her eyes filled with tears. You can't protect someone from everything. She squeezed my hand. But you can choose whether to believe them. That afternoon, Mara called. Don't go to Warehouse 17, she said. Why? Because Victor is there. I stood. Then I'm going. Elena told you not to go alone. I won't. I looked at Elena. She understood immediately. No, she said. I need to stop this. You need evidence. She was right. So instead of confronting Victor, we contacted federal investigators through Mara's old legal connection. We gave them the research files. They told us to wait. But that evening, Victor appeared at the hospital. He walked into Elena's room, carrying flowers. I stepped between them. What are you doing here? He smiled. I wanted to see how she was. Elena looked at him. Then she whispered, You're thinking about the warehouse. Victor's smile disappeared. She continued, You're thinking about the cameras. His face went pale. You're thinking about Daniel. Victor looked at me, then at her, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. He turned toward the door. 2 investigators entered at exactly that moment. Victor stopped. One of them said, Mr. Hale, we'd like to ask you some questions. Victor looked at me. You don't understand what you've built. I said nothing. He continued, Your brother didn't create this. He glanced at Elena. He discovered it. Then Victor was taken away. I thought it was over. I was wrong, because the investigators searched his office that night. And inside Warehouse 17, they found evidence that made the crash look like only the beginning. There were recordings, dozens of them, conversations between me and Elena, arguments, private phone calls, even recordings from our apartment. Someone had been watching us for months. And among those files was one recording made 3 days before the crash. In it, Daniel's voice said, "Once Rowan signs the transfer, Elena becomes irrelevant." I listened to those words twice. Then a third time. Elena stood beside me. She didn't cry. Neither did I, because something inside me had finally gone quiet. For years, I had fought to save my marriage. Now I understood that the person I was fighting against had never been Elena. It had been a life I was too afraid to leave. And when I finally looked at my wife, I knew one thing. Whatever happened next, I would never ask her to sacrifice herself for me again. The recording changed everything. By sunrise, Daniel was gone. His phone was disconnected. His apartment was empty. His company access had been disabled. The investigators told me not to contact him. I agreed, but I couldn't stop thinking about one question. Why did he want control of my invention so badly? The answer came 3 days later. Daniel had been secretly selling access to our research to a private security company. They weren't interested in preventing structural disasters. They wanted predictive surveillance. My invention could identify patterns in human movement, stress, fear, and behavior. With enough data, it could predict what someone was likely to do before they did it. That wasn't mind reading. It was something more dangerous. It was turning human behavior into a measurable weapon. And my brother had been building that system behind my back. But there was one thing nobody could explain. Why Elena? The investigators found the answer in the crash report. Her car hadn't simply lost control. A small device had been attached beneath the dashboard. It emitted a sequence of low-frequency vibrations designed to interfere with the car's sensors. But it had done something else. It had triggered an experimental resonance response. Elena's brain had reacted to the pattern. The result was impossible to predict. She hadn't gained a supernatural power. She had developed an extraordinary sensitivity to the patterns the system had been designed to detect. She could recognize emotional states almost instantly. She could sense hesitation, fear, deception, intent. Not perfectly, not every thought, but enough to make lies difficult around her. When the doctor explained it, Elena looked strangely calm. "So, I'm not reading minds." "No," he said. "You're detecting patterns." She nodded. "That's almost worse." I smiled despite myself. "Why?" "Because people can lie with words." She looked at me. "But their bodies keep talking." The weeks that followed were difficult. Daniel was eventually arrested after investigators traced his accounts. Victor cooperated with authorities in exchange for a reduced sentence. The company survived, but my reputation did not. News outlets described the scandal as a corporate espionage case. They never understood the personal part. People kept asking why I hadn't noticed. I had no answer, because the truth was uncomfortable. I had noticed. I had simply chosen not to see it. I had ignored Elena because listening to her would have forced me to question my own choices. She had warned me. I had called her suspicious. She had asked for time. I had called her demanding. She had protected my work. I had treated her sacrifices as normal. The crash had not created the distance between us. It had exposed it. One evening, Elena asked me to sit beside her. "I want to go home." I smiled. "Of course." She looked at me carefully. "Not our apartment." I understood. "Where?" "Somewhere quiet." We rented a small house near the coast. For the first time in years, there were no executives calling. No meetings. No deadlines. No family arguments. Just mornings, sunlight, and the sound of waves. But peace didn't heal everything immediately. Elena had nightmares. Sometimes she woke up terrified because she could feel someone else's fear from a neighboring room. Sometimes crowded places overwhelmed her. Sometimes she couldn't tell whether a feeling belonged to her or someone standing nearby. I learned to ask before touching her. I learned to listen. And slowly, she began to trust me again. Not as her husband. Not yet. Just as someone safe. One afternoon, she found my old engineering notebook. You still have this? I thought you threw it away. She smiled. You know me better than that. I opened it. Pages of calculations filled the paper. Most were incomplete. Elena pointed to a diagram. This part. What about it? You were trying to make the system detect bridge fatigue. Yes, but you never finished the feedback system. I stared at her. No. Why not? I couldn't make it stable. She looked at the page again. Then she said something that would change my future. What if the instability is the information? I laughed. What? The vibrations you're trying to remove. She tapped the page. You treated them like noise. I stared at the diagram. Then slowly I understood. The system had always been designed to filter irregular patterns. But what if those irregularities were exactly where the most useful information existed? I spent the next 3 months rebuilding the prototype. Elena sat nearby while I worked. She didn't do the engineering for me. She simply asked questions. Questions I had stopped asking myself years ago. What does that signal mean? Why are you filtering that? Have you tested the opposite? She never tried to control the project. She helped me see it differently. Then, one night, the prototype finally worked. A small sensor attached to a steel beam detected microscopic structural changes before the beam showed visible damage. I stared at the screen. Elena smiled. You did it. No. I looked at her. We did. She shook her head. You built it. You believed in it. She smiled. I believed in you. That sentence hit harder than anything she had said since the crash. Because I remembered the first time she had said it. We were 22. And I had been foolish enough to think her belief would last forever, no matter how badly I treated it. Now I understood. Belief was not something a person owed you. It was something you earned. And I'd spent years spending hers without putting anything back. The prototype attracted attention almost immediately. A university research center contacted me after Mara presented our results at a conference. They offered funding. Then another group called. Then a bridge authority asked for a demonstration. I was cautious. After everything that had happened, I refused to let anyone control the technology again. So I created a new company, not a division, not a partnership controlled by investors. A company where the research would remain independent. I called it Resonance Safety Systems. The name was Elena's idea. You need to remember what almost destroyed you, she said. That's a strange reason to name a company. Exactly. She smiled. I understood. The past shouldn't control the future, but it could teach it. Within a year, our system was being tested on bridges, tunnels, and aging infrastructure. The success was gradual. A small contract here, a failed demonstration there, a grant that arrived 6 months late, a prototype that broke during testing. There were days when I wondered if I had made another mistake. But this time, I didn't run from difficulty. I learned. I rebuilt. I listened, and I noticed something else. Elena had begun changing too. Her strange ability didn't disappear. She learned to control it. She could enter a room and immediately sense tension. She could recognize when an engineer was hiding a mistake. She could tell when someone was frightened but pretending to be confident. At first, she hated it. Eventually, she learned to use it carefully. She never exposed people's private thoughts. She simply helped me understand people. And when we hired our first team, she became the person everyone trusted. Not because she could sense dishonesty, because she listened without judging. One evening, she asked me a question. Do you still want to be married to me? I didn't answer immediately. She looked away. I need the truth. I know. I took a breath. Yes. She looked back at me. But I don't want the marriage we had. Neither of us spoke. I don't want you sacrificing yourself for me. I continued. And I don't want to become someone you have to rescue. She nodded. I don't want that either. So what do we do? She smiled faintly. We start again. Not as strangers. Not pretending the past never happened. As two people who finally understood what they had almost lost. Our marriage was never magically repaired. There were arguments. There were nights when old memories returned. There were moments when I became defensive and Elena became distant. But this time we talked. Sometimes painfully. Sometimes for hours. And slowly, trust returned. Not the blind trust of our younger years. Something stronger. A trust built after knowing exactly how badly we could hurt each other. Then came the breakthrough. A bridge in Northbridge had been flagged by our system. The city engineer initially dismissed it. The bridge looked perfectly safe. Our system disagreed. The readings showed an unusual vibration pattern inside one of the support joints. They tested it manually. Nothing. They tested again. Still nothing. The city planned to ignore the warning. I insisted. Close the bridge for 48 hours. The engineer frowned. You're asking us to shut down a major route based on a signal your system has never detected before. Yes. That's a huge decision. I know. Then Elena stepped forward. She looked at the engineer. You're afraid we're wrong. He stared at her. Yes. You should be. He looked confused. She continued. But you're more afraid of being blamed for closing the bridge than you are of being blamed if it collapses. Silence. She wasn't reading his mind. She was simply recognizing what everyone in the room could see, but nobody wanted to say. The bridge was closed. 2 days later, inspectors discovered a fracture inside the joint. The damage was severe enough that engineers said another heavy load could have caused a partial collapse. The story went national. Our company became famous overnight, and that was the moment my old life came looking for me. A journalist asked for an interview. I agreed. During the broadcast, the host mentioned my former company. Then she asked about Daniel. I paused. He made choices. Do you hate him? No. Would you forgive him? I already have. She looked surprised. Then would you work with him again? I shook my head. Forgiveness isn't an employment contract. The clip went viral. Within days, people who hadn't spoken to me in years began contacting me. Old investors, former colleagues, people who suddenly remembered that I had once been a brilliant engineer. And then, one afternoon, a letter arrived. There was no return address. I opened it. Only 4 words were written inside. I know where you live. I looked at Elena. She had already sensed something. Her expression changed. Someone's coming. Who? She closed her eyes, then opened them slowly. Daniel. And for the first time since the crash, I wasn't afraid of seeing my brother. I was ready, because the man Daniel had manipulated no longer existed. Daniel did not come to the house that night. He came the following afternoon. I was standing outside the workshop when I saw his car stop at the gate. For a moment, I remembered him as my little brother, the boy who used to wait outside my school, the teenager who borrowed my jacket and never returned it, the man who had stood beside me when our father died. Then I remembered the recording. Once Rowan signs the transfer, Elena becomes irrelevant. I walked toward the gate. Daniel stepped out. He looked thinner, older. The confidence that had once filled every room had disappeared. Elena is inside, I said. I know. You're not going near her. He nodded. I didn't come for her. Then why are you here? He looked at the workshop. To see what you built. I almost laughed. You mean what you tried to steal? His jaw tightened. I made mistakes. You made choices. He looked away. I was trying to protect the company. No. I shook my head. You were protecting yourself. Daniel's eyes hardened. You think everything happened because I wanted money? I don't know what you wanted. I wanted you to succeed. I stared at him. Then why did you spend years telling me Elena was holding me back? He had no answer. I continued. You knew she was the one person who would question you. That isn't true. It is. Daniel lowered his voice. She was going to expose the project. What project? The surveillance system. I felt my stomach tighten. Daniel looked exhausted. You don't understand what happened after the first investors came in. They didn't want bridge technology. They wanted behavioral prediction. And you agreed. At first. And later, I tried to stop them. I stared at him. You're asking me to believe that? I have documents. He reached into his coat. I didn't take them. You've lied too many times. I know. Then why should I trust anything you say? Because I'm finally afraid. That answer surprised me. Not because it was convincing, because it was honest. Elena appeared in the doorway. Daniel looked at her. His face changed. She didn't speak. She simply watched him. After a moment, Daniel whispered, I'm sorry. Elena's expression remained calm. I know. He swallowed. I never meant for the crash to happen. You knew it might. He closed his eyes. I knew they were testing the system. And you didn't warn me. No. Why? Because I thought I could control it. Elena gave a sad smile. That was your mistake. Daniel nodded. I know. He placed the documents on the ground. Then he walked away. I waited until his car disappeared. Elena came beside me. Did he tell the truth? I looked at her. You already know. She shook her head. No. What? I don't know everything. She touched her temple. I can sense intentions, but people can have several at once. That surprised me. Then how do you know when someone is lying? I don't. She looked toward the road. I know when they're afraid. That distinction stayed with me, because fear wasn't the same as remorse. Daniel could be afraid of prison, afraid of losing everything, afraid of being hated. That didn't mean he regretted hurting us. We handed his documents to the investigators. They led to a much larger case. Several executives had been financing the surveillance project. Daniel had kept records, not because he was innocent, because he had planned to use those records as insurance. His greed had helped expose the people behind the operation. He eventually accepted a plea agreement. He lost his position, his wealth, and his professional license. But he wasn't sent away for decades. The investigators believed he had stopped the crash operation before it happened. He simply hadn't stopped it soon enough. That distinction mattered. He wasn't the mastermind. He wasn't innocent either. For the first time, I understood that consequences didn't need to look like revenge. Sometimes they were simply the life created by your own choices. Months passed. My company grew. Our technology was adopted by several major infrastructure agencies. Then came an unexpected offer. A global engineering group wanted to acquire us for an enormous amount of money. The number was enough to change our lives forever. My team celebrated. I didn't. I showed Elena the offer. She read it. Then she looked at me. What do you want? I smiled. No one has ever asked me that question without wanting something from the answer. She laughed softly. I am asking. I looked at the document. Years ago, I would have signed immediately. Now I knew better. I don't want to sell. Elena smiled. Then don't. So I rejected the offer. Instead, we expanded carefully. We funded research. We trained young engineers. We created grants for students who couldn't afford expensive laboratories. And one day, I realized something strange. I was happier with less money than I had ever been with more. Because this time, my life belonged to me. And then Elena received an invitation. A university wanted her to speak about surviving the crash and adapting to her unusual neurological condition. She didn't want to go. I don't want people treating me like a miracle. You aren't a miracle. She raised an eyebrow. Careful. You're my wife. She smiled. And you're stubborn. She laughed. I'll consider going. She eventually accepted. Her speech wasn't about the crash. It was about listening. To people. To fear. To your own doubts. At the end, a student asked her, "What is the greatest thing you learned?" Elena looked at me. Then she answered, "Never confuse being needed with being loved." I felt those words inside my chest, because I knew exactly what she meant. Our marriage became quieter after that. Not smaller. Quieter. We stopped trying to prove anything. On Sundays, we walked along the coast. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we didn't. One evening, Elena asked, "Do you ever miss the old days?" I thought about it. I miss who we were before we hurt each other. She nodded. So do I. Would you go back? She smiled. No. That surprised me. Why? Because we wouldn't know what we know now. She took my hand. We'd make the same mistakes. She was right. The past wasn't something I wanted anymore. It was something I understood. Then, almost 2 years after the crash, I received a call from the hospital. A young engineer had been injured while inspecting a tunnel. Our system had detected instability, but the local authority ignored the warning. The accident wasn't fatal, but it could have been. I drove there immediately. The injured engineer looked at me from his hospital bed. "Your system warned us," he said. Yes. I should have listened. I remember myself. How many warnings had I ignored? How many times had Elena tried to tell me something was wrong? The difference was that I had another chance. The engineer asked, "Why did you build it?" I thought about the old answer. To save lives. But that wasn't the whole truth anymore. I built it because I wanted to stop people from losing everything because of something they never saw coming. He nodded. I left the hospital that night with a strange sense of peace. Then I saw a familiar figure outside. Daniel. He looked at me from across the parking lot. He didn't approach. He simply nodded. I nodded back. Then he walked away. I didn't follow him. Some people belong in your past, even when you no longer hate them. A month later, Elena and I received another surprise. She was pregnant. We sat in the doctor's office in stunned silence. Neither of us spoke for almost a minute. Then Elena started laughing. I started laughing too. I reached for her hand. Are you scared? Terrified? Me too. She looked at me. But happy. Very. That night, we stood in the kitchen planning a nursery. We argued over paint. We argued over furniture. We argued over names. For the first time, our arguments felt ordinary. Beautifully ordinary. Then Elena suddenly became quiet. I turned toward her. What? She looked at me. I heard something. My heart stopped. What? She smiled. Our baby. I stared. What did you hear? She laughed. Not thoughts. Then, a heartbeat. I relaxed. She placed my hand against her stomach. That's all. I smiled. For once, I didn't need to understand everything. I only needed to be there. But our happiness was interrupted when an envelope arrived from Daniel. Inside was a letter. He wrote that he had accepted responsibility for his part in the surveillance project. He wrote that he had been offered a job after his release from the company, but refused it. He had started working with a nonprofit that helped whistleblowers expose corporate misconduct. The final paragraph was short. I used to think winning meant being the person who controlled everything. I was wrong. You built something I could never build because you learned how to let people choose. I'm sorry I tried to take that from you. I read it twice. Then I folded it. Elena looked at me. Are you going to answer? Yes. What will you say? I thought for a moment. Thank you. She smiled. That sounds like you. I sent the letter. No forgiveness speech. No reopening the past. Just acknowledgement. Because forgiveness didn't require friendship. It didn't require forgetting. And it certainly didn't require returning to the same life. Our daughter was born 4 months later. The first time I held her, I understood something I had never understood before. Life didn't become meaningful when people finally recognized your value. It became meaningful when you stopped measuring your value through their recognition. I had spent years trying to prove myself to my company, to my brother, to investors, even to Elena. Now I simply wanted to be a good husband, a good father, a decent man. And perhaps that was the secret power the crash had given both of us. Not the ability to sense fear, not the ability to detect lies. It had given us the courage to stop lying to ourselves. 3 years after the crash, I stopped checking the news about my old company. That was how I knew I had truly moved on. There had been a time when every headline mentioning Daniel could ruin my entire day. Now, if someone mentioned his name, I simply felt tired. Not angry, not victorious, just tired. Our daughter, Lily, was 2 years old and had developed the habit of following Elena everywhere. If Elena went into the kitchen, Lily followed. If Elena sat down to read, Lily climbed into her lap. If Elena went into the garden, Lily demanded to come too. I often watched them from my office window. The scene was ordinary, and somehow, ordinary had become the most precious thing in my life. Our company had grown beyond anything I had imagined, but I refused to let it consume me again. We had strict limits. No meetings after dinner. No business calls during family weekends. No sacrificing important moments for another contract. I had learned the hard way that success could become another kind of prison if you weren't careful. Then one morning, a message arrived from a government infrastructure agency. They wanted our technology used nationwide. It was the largest contract we had ever been offered. My board wanted me to accept immediately. I asked for a week. Everyone was confused. One director said, "This is the opportunity of a lifetime." I smiled. I've had that sentence used against me before. They laughed, but I was serious. That evening, I discussed it with Elena. She read the proposal carefully. What's bothering you? The scale. You can handle it. That's not what I'm worried about. What then? I looked at her. I don't want the company to become what the old one became. She nodded. Then build safeguards before you accept. That was Elena. She never told me what decision to make. She asked questions until I could make it myself. We accepted the contract with conditions. Independent oversight. Strict privacy protections. No behavioral tracking. No sale of collected data. No access for military or private surveillance applications. It cost us some investors. We lost one major partner. But we kept control. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was losing. I felt like I was choosing. Then something unexpected happened. Our research team discovered a new application. The same vibration analysis technology that had nearly destroyed our lives could detect subtle changes in a human body during medical emergencies. Not thoughts, not emotions, physical signals, breathing irregularities, tremors, changes in movement. It could help doctors detect certain emergencies earlier. I remember the hospital, the machines beside Elena's bed, the doctor telling me she had survived. I realized our technology had come full circle. Something created from fear could be rebuilt into something that protected people. We started a medical research division. Elena became involved in the ethical review board. She was the perfect person for the role. She understood better than anyone what happened when technology crossed a boundary without consent. One afternoon, a young researcher asked her why she cared so much about privacy. Elena looked at him. Because being able to know something doesn't mean you have the right to know it. The room went silent. I smiled. She had learned how to live with her strange ability. She never used it to invade people. Instead, it made her more protective of boundaries. That was what I admired most about her. Her power had never made her cruel. It had made her more compassionate. Then, unexpectedly, I received a call from Mara. There's something you should know. What? Daniel is coming back. My heart tightened. Why? He's been released from his restrictions. Is he contacting us? No. Then what does he want? Mara hesitated. He asked about Elena. I stared through the window. Did you tell him anything? No. Good. But that night, Elena already knew. He's thinking about us. I looked at her. Did he contact you? No. Then how? She smiled sadly. I can feel when someone is carrying guilt. He sat beside her. Do you want to see him? She was quiet for a long time. No. I nodded. Then you won't. She looked at me. Would you? I thought about my brother, the child I once protected, the man who betrayed me, the stranger who had eventually admitted what he had done. I don't know. And that was the truth. I wasn't angry anymore. But forgiveness had boundaries too. 2 weeks later, Daniel appeared at our company. He didn't ask to see me. He asked to see Elena. Security called me. I went downstairs. Daniel stood in the lobby. He looked nothing like the man I remembered. No expensive suit. No confident smile. No assistance. Just a plain jacket and tired eyes. I won't stay long, he said. You shouldn't. He nodded. I know. He handed me a small envelope. What is it? Something that belongs to Elena. I opened it. Inside was a photograph. Elena and I, 23 years old, standing beside our first prototype. I had forgotten that photograph existed. On the back was handwriting. You two looked happy before the world got complicated. I looked at Daniel. Why give this to us? Because I stole enough from you. He looked down. I didn't want to keep this too. I almost told him to leave. Instead, I asked, are you sorry? His eyes filled with tears. Yes. For what? He struggled. For making you choose between success and the woman who loved you. My throat tightened. I didn't make that choice. No. He looked at me. You made it yourself. That was the first honest thing he had ever said about it. Then he whispered, I just made it easier for you to make the wrong one. Elena came downstairs. Daniel turned toward her. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then he said, I'm sorry. Elena looked at him. I know. I don't expect forgiveness. You shouldn't. He nodded. I don't expect you to trust me. You're right. His face tightened. I just wanted to say it once. Elena stepped closer. I believe that you're sorry. Daniel looked relieved. Then she continued, but I don't want you in our lives. The relief disappeared. He nodded slowly. I understand. I don't hate you. I know, but I don't want to know you anymore. He swallowed. That hurts. Elena's voice softened. It should. Daniel looked at her. Why? Because if it doesn't hurt, you haven't understood what you did. He lowered his head. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Then I remembered the hospital, the recordings, the crash, the years Elena had spent being treated like an inconvenience. Pity didn't erase consequences. Daniel left. This time, I didn't watch him through the window. I returned to my office. Elena followed. She placed the photograph on my desk. Keep it. I looked at the younger versions of us. Yes. Why? Because they deserve to be remembered. She smiled, but not repeated. Never. Months later, Our medical technology received regulatory approval. The first hospital using the system sent us a report. A patient had experienced a dangerous respiratory change while sleeping. The system detected it. The doctors intervened. The patient survived. I read the report twice. Then I walked into Elena's office. She was reviewing privacy protocols. I handed her the report. She read it. Her eyes filled with tears. "This is what you wanted," she said. "No." I shook my head. "This is what we wanted." She smiled. And suddenly I understood the true meaning of the secret power that had changed everything. It wasn't merely Elena's ability to sense what other people were hiding. The crash had forced us to see what had been hidden inside our own lives. My ambition, her loneliness, Daniel's greed, our broken communication, our fear of starting over. The power was awareness, and awareness had given us a choice. We could repeat the past, or build something different. We chose different. A year later, I was invited to give a keynote speech at the university where Elena had once studied. The auditorium was full. Students filled every seat. Engineers, researchers, entrepreneurs, young people who reminded me of myself before I understood what ambition could cost. The moderator asked me, "What was the biggest turning point in your career?" Everyone expected me to mention the bridge that made us famous, or the government contract, or the medical breakthrough. Instead, I said, "A car crash." The room became quiet. I told them about failure, about trust, about how easily success can convince you that people who love you are obstacles. I didn't mention every detail. Some stories belong to the people who live them. But I said one thing clearly. Never become so successful that you stop listening to the person who knew you before you were successful. Afterward, a student approached me. "Sir, is it true that your wife has a special ability?" I smiled. "She's very good at understanding people." "Can she read minds?" "No." The student looked disappointed. I laughed. "But she's taught me something better." "What?" I looked across the room. Elena was waiting near the exit with Lily holding her hand. "To listen before people have to scream." The student smiled. "That sounds useful. It saved my life." I walked toward my family. Lily ran toward me. I picked her up. Elena kissed my cheek. For a moment, everything was quiet. Then Elena looked at me. "You're thinking about something." "What?" She smiled. "You're thinking you're lucky." I laughed. "I am." She shook her head. "No." She pointed at Lily. "You're grateful." I looked at my daughter, then my wife. Yes. She was right. There was a difference. Luck was something that happened to you. Gratitude was something you chose. That evening, we drove home along the coast. The sun was setting. Lily slept in the back seat. Elena rested her head against the window. I reached over and took her hand. She squeezed mine. Neither of us said anything. We didn't need to. Years ago, I had believed love meant never losing someone. Now I understood that love was not ownership. It was not sacrifice without limits. It was not blind loyalty. Love was choosing someone freely again and again, while still allowing them to remain themselves. The crash had nearly taken Elena from me. But the truth was, I had already been losing her long before that night. I just hadn't noticed. Her strange new ability didn't save our marriage. She did, by surviving, by refusing to become bitter, by forcing me to confront the truths I had avoided. And I changed because I finally understood that the greatest betrayal in my life hadn't been committed by my brother. It had been the years I had betrayed myself by becoming someone I didn't respect. I couldn't change the past. I couldn't erase the pain. I couldn't make Elena forget the things I had done. But I could make sure the rest of our story was different. When we reached home, Lily woke up. She stretched her arms toward Elena. "Mommy." Elena smiled. "I'm here." I watched them walk inside. Then I stood alone for a moment beneath the evening sky. Once, I had believed my greatest achievement would be the machine I built. I was wrong. My greatest achievement was the life I finally learned how to live. And for the first time, I didn't need anyone from my old life to recognize it. I already knew its value. 5 years after the crash, I received a letter from Daniel for the last time. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a request. It was a simple announcement. He had started a small consulting organization that helped companies expose internal fraud before it became catastrophic. At the bottom of the letter, he wrote, I finally understand that trust isn't something you demand after you've broken it. You spend the rest of your life becoming someone worthy of it. I folded the letter and put it away. I didn't feel anything dramatic. No anger, no satisfaction, just peace. That was how I knew the past had finally become the past. Our company had grown into something much larger than I had imagined. But I had deliberately kept it human. The original workshop was still there. The same steel table, the same battered toolbox, the same wall where Elena had once taped my first handwritten calculations. Only now, young engineers worked there. Students came from universities around the country. Some had brilliant ideas. Some had terrible ones. Some were afraid to fail. I recognized that fear immediately. Whenever I saw it, I remember myself at 22. I remembered Elena handing me her savings. I remembered her saying, build it again. So I created a scholarship in her name. Not because she needed a monument, because there were thousands of young people who simply needed one person to believe they were worth another attempt. The scholarship became one of the most important things our company ever did. Elena chaired the foundation. She refused to let me name the building after her. I don't need my name on a wall. What do you want? She thought for a moment. A room where people can fail safely. So we created a laboratory called the Second Attempt Lab. The name made everyone laugh, but it became famous. Students could bring unfinished inventions there. They could test ideas. They could fail without being embarrassed. And every year, Elena spoke to them. She never talked about her strange ability unless someone asked. Instead, she talked about boundaries, about consent, about trust, about the danger of allowing technology to become more important than the people it was supposed to protect. One afternoon, a student asked her, if you could remove the ability you gained after the crash, would you? Elena thought carefully. Yes. The student looked surprised. Even though it changed your life? Yes. Why? Because some gifts arrive carrying pain. She paused, but I wouldn't erase what I learned from it. I watched from the back of the room. That answer stayed with me. She didn't romanticize what happened to her. She didn't pretend the crash was a blessing. It wasn't. It was terrible. It hurt people. It nearly destroyed us. But she had refused to let tragedy become the author of her future. That was the difference. The following year, our daughter Lily started school. On her first day, she clung to Elena's hand. I don't want to go. Elena knelt. I know. Will you stay? Until you feel brave. Lily looked at me. And Daddy? I smiled. I'll be right outside. She finally walked through the doors. I watched her disappear. Then Elena slipped her hand into mine. You're thinking too much. I was thinking about how fast she's growing. She'll be 16 tomorrow if you keep doing that. I laughed. Probably. We walked back to the car. Then Elena stopped. What? She looked at me. I heard something. I smiled. What now? Your heart. I looked at her. That's not your special power. No. She leaned closer. That's just because I'm standing next to you. I laughed. For a woman who had once been terrified by everything she could sense, Elena had learned to joke about it. That was another sign she had healed. Not completely. Nobody does. But enough. Then came the anniversary. 10 years after the crash. The company held a private gathering. No journalists. No cameras. Just our team, our families, and a few people who had been with us from the beginning. Mara gave a speech. She talked about the old research, the scandal, the new company. Then she raised her glass. To Elena. Everyone applauded. Elena looked embarrassed. I leaned toward her. You're famous. Don't encourage them. I laughed. Later that evening, after everyone left, Elena and I stood outside the workshop. The ocean wind was cold. I looked at the building. Do you ever think about that night? She knew exactly what I meant. The crash. Yes. Sometimes. What do you remember? She was quiet. The sound. Which one? The moment everything went silent. I looked at her. She continued. For a few seconds, I thought I was dying. I reached for her hand. I was afraid you were. I know. Then what happened? She smiled faintly. I heard you. I frowned. You weren't there. No. She looked toward the dark ocean. But I remembered you. She squeezed my hand. And I remembered the first time you told me you wanted to build something that could save people. I felt tears rise. I had forgotten that. I hadn't. She looked at me. That was why I survived. I shook my head. You survived because you were strong. No. She smiled. I survived because I still had something unfinished. I understood. She wasn't talking about the company. She was talking about us. We had unfinished words, unfinished apologies, an unfinished life. She had come back because some part of her still believed our story didn't have to end where it had broken. I held her close. I'm glad you came back. She whispered, so am I. A few months later, the final chapter of Daniel's story reached us through the news. He had publicly testified about the surveillance network. His testimony helped prosecutors close the remaining cases. Afterward, he disappeared from public life. No interviews, no books, no attempt to profit from his story. Just work. I never contacted him. He never contacted me. And that was okay. Some relationships don't need to be restored to be resolved. Years later, Lily asked about him. Uncle Daniel? I looked at Elena. She nodded. Yes, I said. What happened to him? He made some very bad choices. Is he a bad person? I thought carefully. No. She looked confused. Then why did he do bad things? Because being a good person doesn't mean you'll never do something terrible. Then what does it mean? I looked at Elena. She smiled. It means you take responsibility when you do. Lily thought about that. Then she asked, did he say sorry? Yes. Did you forgive him? Yes. Then why don't we see him? I smiled gently. Because forgiveness doesn't always mean someone comes back into your life. Lily nodded slowly. Like when I broke your cup? I laughed. Exactly. Elena laughed too. The house filled with the sound. And I realized how far we had come. Once, our home had been filled with silence because neither of us wanted to say what we really felt. Now it was filled with ordinary noise. Arguments over homework. Laughter at dinner. Footsteps in the hallway. Lily practicing piano badly. Elena complaining about my terrible cooking. It wasn't perfect. It was real, and real was better. One evening, years after the crash, Elena and I returned to the bridge that had changed our company forever. The city had installed a plaque thanking our research team. We stood beneath it. I read the inscription. Then Elena said, you know what I remember? What? The first time we met. I smiled. You spilled coffee on me. You walked into me. You were standing in the middle of the hallway. You were reading while walking. She laughed. I like you anyway. I know. Ow. Because you kept talking to me. She looked at me. Maybe I was just patient. You were. She smiled. Still am. I took her hand. Thank you. For what? For not giving up on me. She shook her head. I did. I stared at her. What? I did give up on the old you. She smiled softly. But I didn't give up on us. I looked away because my eyes were burning. That sentence explained everything. She hadn't stayed because she was weak. She hadn't forgiven me because she had forgotten. She had chosen to believe people could change. And I had spent the rest of my life trying to prove she was right. The sun began to set behind the bridge. The same kind of structure my younger self had dreamed about. Only now, I understood that the strongest things weren't built from steel. They were built from choices. Every day, we choose what kind of person we will be. Every day, we choose what deserves our attention. Every day, we choose whether old pain will control tomorrow. I once thought revenge meant making Daniel regret what he had done. It didn't. Revenge was not watching his career collapse. It wasn't seeing my company become more successful than his. It wasn't becoming rich enough that I no longer needed anyone. The real victory was much quieter. I stopped checking whether Daniel regretted losing me. I stopped wondering whether my old company understood my value. I stopped waiting for Elena to prove that she still loved me. I stopped trying to win arguments with people who were no longer part of my life. I simply built a life worth waking up for. A life with work that mattered. A wife who respected me. A daughter who trusted me. Friends who challenged me. Young engineers who believed in possibilities. And a future that didn't depend on anyone from my past. Before we left the bridge, Elena looked at me. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if the crash hadn't happened? I consider the question. Sometimes. And I think I would have lost you eventually. She nodded. Maybe. I don't like that answer. Neither do I. She squeezed my hand. But that's why we don't live there anymore. I smiled. No. We walked toward the car together. Behind us stood the bridge. Ahead of us was the road home. And for the first time, I didn't need to know exactly where it would lead. I had spent years believing my wife survived the crash with a strange secret power. In a way, that was true. She could sense fear. She could recognize hidden intentions. She could hear the emotional patterns people tried to hide. But that wasn't the power that changed everything. The real power was what she did with the truth once she could see it. She didn't become cruel. She didn't become vengeful. She didn't use people's weaknesses against them. She learned to choose. And she taught me to choose too. To choose honesty over comfort, family over status, purpose over applause, peace over revenge, and love without ownership. That was the life we built after the wreckage. Not a perfect life, not a painless one, a real one. Years later, when people asked me about the greatest invention I had ever created, they expected me to name the system that made our company successful. I always gave them the same answer. My greatest invention was learning how to live differently. Most people laughed because they thought I was being philosophical. Elena never laughed. She always understood, because she had been there when everything broke. And she was there when we rebuilt. Not into the people we used to be, into people who finally knew what mattered. I once believed losing someone was the greatest tragedy. Now I know it isn't. The greatest tragedy is having someone beside you and never seeing them. I almost made that mistake. The crash gave Elena a secret power, but it gave me something too. A second chance without a second life. A future without erasing the past. And the courage to finally understand that the greatest revenge against the people who hurt you is not destroying them. It is becoming so at peace with your life that you no longer need them to regret losing you. I looked at Elena as we drove home. She caught me staring. What? Nothing. You're thinking again. I am. What? I smiled. That I'm exactly where I want to be. She reached across the center console and took my hand. Good. Outside, the road stretched ahead beneath the evening sky. And this time, I wasn't afraid of where it led. I was simply grateful to be going there with her.